Hello, this is Kevin Padula, creator and host of The Story of Rhode Island. This episode is the first of what I hope will be many in-person conversations for the channel. For this premiere, I sat down with historian John Landry to talk about Rhode Island's economic history. Our conversation covered a lot of ground, from the impact slavery had on Rhode Island's 18th century economy, to Samuel Slater and the rise of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, to the state's industrial decline in the 20th century. Along the way, John explained how Rhode Island's individualistic, non-conformist spirit helped turn it into a hotbed of entrepreneurial activity. He was a phenomenal first guest, and his insights helped to make up for any shortcomings I still have as I continue to grow as a host. Finally, if there are any other Rhode Island historians or scholars you think I should speak with, please share their names in the comments below. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hey, John.
Hey.
Happy to have you on the podcast. Excited for the conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So before we dive into it, do you mind telling my listeners a little bit about your background and why it makes you an expert in Rhode Island's economic history?
Well, it's always funny to call yourself an expert in anything, but yeah, so I actually grew up in Louisiana, but I moved to Rhode Island for graduate school and got a PhD in the history department in American economic history at Brown University. And so I arrived in '87 and finished in '94. And I've always been interested in economic history. And so I started getting really interested in Rhode Island's history, particularly around the economic side, the economic development side. And yeah, so I'm writing a book right now on the history of economic development in Rhode Island. And I hope to finish it sometime next year. So that's
nice.
So it would appear probably early in 2027. That's the goal.
Very cool. So is it going to cover like from the founding to the 20th century? What's the time span look like?
So you might appreciate, yeah, it's going to cover everything.
Okay.
And I've got pretty much a first draft done. And it goes up to the, we talk about 38 studios and a lot of present stuff. And then it starts with Roger Williams. So I guess it goes the whole way. Now, unlike, I'm sort of, I'm not as much of a storyteller as you are, but I'm definitely a character driven.
Yep.
So each chapter is going to be a mix of analysis and an individual story. So chapter 1 is Roger Williams and what it meant to have economic development at all.
Yep.
And then I think I finish on Kurt Wadenstein with 38 Studios and the Economic Development Council, and so it goes all the way to the present.
Who was your favorite character when you're going through like the economic history?
That's a toughie. Well, I liked Governor Samuel Cranston. I don't think he gets enough credit. You talked about it a little bit.
Yep.
That's a tough. And I like George Corliss.
Yeah,
that's an easy one. So I don't know. I don't really think in terms of favorites, I suppose.
Okay.
They're all interesting to me. I like writing about them.
Yep.
So,
very fair. Yeah, Samuel Cranston I didn't know anything about him until I started working on the podcast, but like what he did in the early 18th century for Rhode Island was like huge for economic development. It was pretty mind-blowing to learn about it.
Yeah.
It was very cool.
I have a whole chapter that talks a lot about him. So
nice.
It goes into more detail than you obviously could, but yeah.
Very nice.
That's the idea.
Okay, so when you're doing your research and like as you've gone through all that, what have you come across that you've realized makes Rhode Islanders unique or like distinctive?
Okay, so that's a great question. The easy answer has always been freedom of religion, liberty of conscience. You talk a lot about that in the 17th century. And that was obviously the initial point. Why did Roger Williams come here? Why did Anne Hutchinson come here? Clearly, it was about freedom to practice the way they wanted. And also, especially with Roger Williams, it was the freedom for everyone to not do whatever the established society says.
Yeah.
So that said, I think you said it better actually in bonus episode. I don't know if people have really listened to it, but
Okay.
it's not so much freedom of religion as non-conformity.
Okay.
I think that's what makes Rhode Island distinctive, because by 1800, by 1800, you had pretty much, certainly by 1830, you had just as much freedom of religion in Massachusetts as you did in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
So, that was definitely distinctive at first, but what I think has continued over the centuries and has been lost a bit in the last couple decades has been this non-conformity. And there's a great example in 1930.
Okay.
So the Great Depression hits and all these New England states are scrambling, and somebody has the great idea of we should have a New England Council of States to deal with the Depression.
Okay.
Everybody signs on except Rhode Island. Rhode Island says, thank you, but we're going to do this ourselves. And so even in 1930, in the midst of this economic crisis, you still see that kind of sense of nonconformity and kind of almost individualism, entrepreneurship, kind of interest in going your own way, and also a kind of decentralization, which I don't think gets enough credit, but it was strong even in Rhode Island. There's a reason why we have 42 towns.
Yeah.
Kind of doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But we have them because, and there've been over the years, there've been attempts to consolidate and all. And some towns do share school districts and all, but no, every town wants its own.
Yeah.
And that's still a very strong part of Rhode Island's identity, which you don't have so much in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and other places. And so even though in a lot of ways we've kind of converged with our neighboring states, there's still, I think, a sense of nonconformity. And, I see these bumper stickers, I never leave Rhode Island. There's a sense of we're enough. This whole New England stuff, this regional stuff, we're not really that interested.
Yeah.
We're really separate. So I think that's what continues. And that has obviously pluses and minuses in terms of economic development, which I talk about. I mean, as you've, I think, pointed out, Massachusetts and Connecticut are in a lot of ways richer as states than we are.
Yeah.
And some of those advantages of conformity come out and I talk about this a little bit in the book, come out in the 20th century, and you start having some problems here that, again, I think a lot of them are due to the conformity. I mean, there are other reasons too. The states are not as distinct in the 20th century as they were in previous centuries. And the 21st century, things have gotten even muddier. But I think there is still a thread. I mean, when I was in graduate school, there was a real bias against state-level histories. Like, you just didn't do that because the states were all kind of converged anyway, and there wasn't much difference. And maybe it's because I grew up in the South, which definitely sees itself as different.
Yeah.
But coming here, I have got a real sense of that the state is distinct from other states. There's a reason Rhode Island never merged with Massachusetts, even though Massachusetts really wanted it for a long time.
Yes.
And it wasn't just liberty of conscience. I think there were some other things too, which I can talk about. Like, for example, you talk about William Coddington, and I think he deserves a little more credit for the founding of Rhode Island, because in terms of economic development, he was arguably just as important as Roger Williams. I mean, Coddington was a real capitalist. I think that's the best way to think of him. And he and a bunch of other of Anne Hutchinson's followers, they brought a lot of money and a lot of expertise into the colony. And there's a reason why they said, now Portsmouth's not going to work. We're going to go down and found Newport. That's our place. And immediately, as you say, Coddington's imagining this bustling harbor. And the reason he's doing that is that he is even more so than, a lot of the Puritans and the people who went to Massachusetts were these sort of middle-class strivers. You didn't have a lot of subsistence farmers. But Coddington was smart. He could tell that the land here was better for raising livestock than in Massachusetts. And so while he was also an antinomian, he became a Quaker. He was clearly a dissenter. He didn't go along with the Puritan church. So I think that was legitimate, but he was also very much a capitalist. Thomas Hutchinson too. And, they brought a lot of wealth, and they also brought expertise. They were really good at raising livestock. Aquidneck Island and some of the other islands, and to some extent South County, but they're really good for raising livestock. And that was huge for the state. I mean, that book, I think you mentioned Fat Mutton and Liberty of Conscience.
Yeah.
It talks about it at really good
Yeah.
length. So there's a kind of non-conformity and a capitalist entrepreneurship that's really important here. Now, it's a capitalist entrepreneurship that's very much non-conformist, very much, I'm going to do my own thing. I don't care what other people are doing.
Yeah.
Which can make it hard to have really big groups of, like we don't, like the Rhode Island corporations, all these new textile mills, they're all small to mid-size.
Yeah.
You don't get the really big ones except in Massachusetts. And the reason they can do it in Massachusetts is they've got these big conglomerations of capital, and they just sink a lot of money into a Lowell or wherever. And here we don't get along with each other well enough to pull that off. But we're more entrepreneurial. I mean, there's a reason why Massachusetts failed and Samuel Slater succeeded in developing the first mechanized cotton mill here in America. So there's a kind of ingenuity and discipline, but very individualistic, nonconformist. And so when I think about, so how is Rhode Island really different from Massachusetts? It's this nonconformity, even more than liberty of conscience.
Is that like that nonconformity? Is that coming from the founding when people were coming here to escape like what was going on in Massachusetts? I guess what I'm trying to like understand is like, why is there such a focus of people being nonconformists in Rhode Island? Like, how did that develop? Where did that spirit come from?
Well, I think part of it is, Roger Williams is a crazy guy.
He was, yeah.
The idea of just going into the wilderness like that, very few people did that. William Blackstone did it, but he was another weirdo.
Yeah.
But once Williams got here and got along with the Indians okay, then people like William Coddington could then send, surveyors out. Like, I think Coddington sent John Clark even to say, hey, tell us about the soil on Aquidneck. Nobody's really there. Roger Williams is doing the West Bay, but there's this whole East Bay thing that, and particularly Aquidneck, which we hear has good soil, but we don't really know. And so go check it out. And so he went and he said, oh, soil here is really good. And so Coddington brings all this money, gets a bunch of his followers who are also antinomians.
Yeah.
And they come down and they eventually make their way to Newport. And then the problem Rhode Island has with all this is that people like Coddington, they're big guys. They want to be almost like quasi-nobility.
There's an ego, yeah.
So you have a problem with oligarchy. You have a future problem. And the weird thing about Williams is totally selfless. He's this total individualist. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like oligarchy. He doesn't like any domination. Yeah. Whereas William Coddington, he wants to be a great lord.
Yeah.
He wants to make a lot of money, and he and these other wealthy people. There's a reason why Newport did so well for so long, is they were really good at raising livestock and building these large farms and commercializing them and sending the meat and salting it and sending it wherever. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about Aquidneck Island, and there are no wolves around because it's an island. You kill off a couple wolves and you're going to be fine. That doesn't work so well in South County and in Narragansett country. So and the soil up. Providence is a terrible place to put a town in the 17th century. But Williams is like, okay, this will work. We've got a spring here. Yeah. We can make this work. And so nobody really wants to go there. All want to go down to Aquidneck, Newport, and because the nice thing about Coddington, even though he likes these big estates, he's okay with other antinomians and other, weirdo dissenters coming out here and building up. And, he likes a large town too. Yeah. So he just wants to be, kind of deferred to. Yep. And the good thing is you have people like Williams and I think Samuel Horton, I think, who's the founder of Warwick. What's his name?
Oh, Samuel Gordon.
Gordon. Yeah. They say, no, Rhode Island, our colony is not for, grandees, we're for everybody. And so they basically force Coddington to just go along with everything. And Coddington goes along because he really just cares about making money and eventually becomes a Quaker and all that. But it's a really good mix. So you have the capitalists and you have these free thinkers, and they have this nice clash. Whereas in Massachusetts, it's all the Puritan, the saints. You don't have such a nice clash. And so the downside with that clash is you get a weak government. The upside of that clash and the weak government itself is that people are free to do whatever they want. Whereas in Massachusetts, it's very much, and Connecticut, more, to a little less degree, but same idea. And so that's how Rhode Island was really different from the other states. And that's why when there's this great scene, it talks about it in the Breidenbaugh book, where the Winthrop, or maybe some Massachusetts governor, this is like the 1850s, says, "Hey, we hear there's some Quakers in your midst. You got to get rid of them. We've been pretty successful, but you need to get rid of them too, because we can't have them anywhere around us. They're just so destructive." And the governor wrote back, "Well, in our colony, we really let people think what they want, and as long as they're not causing trouble, we're going to let them.
Which was pretty big. I remember learning about that too, because I think the offer was, hey, if you kick the Quakers out, we'll let you in the United Colonies, which would have been really helpful for Rhode Island. But they were like, I think it was William Arnold who said, no, like they're staying. We allow anyone to stay here.
It was more than that. It was, if you let the Quakers in, we're going to stop trading with you. And that was a really serious blow, because Boston was more developed in a lot of ways than Newport. And so a lot of the early shipping from Newport just went to Boston. But fortunately, there was some trading in New Amsterdam. And the good thing about the Quakers is they're a really tight-knit, trusting bunch. And there was a big Quaker presence in the Barbados. So in Barbados, maybe some other, but mainly Barbados. And so you started having all these, when Boston said, don't ship with us, then you started all these ships trading with Barbados down in the Caribbean, and it worked out great. And that's when the Caribbean trade really got going, which was huge.
So one of the things I find hard to believe, but love the thought of it, is them saying, no, we're going to allow the Quakers to stay simply because they really believe in this core idea of religious freedom. Was there something more like a self-interested part to it, where them allowing the Quakers to stay benefits Rhode Island in a way? Or is it really like, no, we just believe in this religious freedom so much that we're going to let them stay no matter?
I think it was mostly like on principle. We're not going to, I mean, some of it was, if you're Massachusetts, we're not going to do what you tell us to do. So Massachusetts was a little tough. Like they're a much bigger colony. They're just much wealth. They've just got a bigger army. They've got, Boston's a big harbor by then, and they're much more connected to the mother country than Rhode Island is. And so you don't want to anger Massachusetts. On the other hand, we want to do our own thing.
Screw them.
So he doesn't say screw you, but he writes back this nice, polite reply and says, "Well, this is how we do things. So this is how we're going to do things." And so eventually, in Massachusetts, they stopped trading it, but Rhode Island got lucky in a lot of things in the 17th century too. I mean, there's a lot of luck involved too. So it wasn't just, oh, we're here, we're great, this is all going to work out fine. I mean, as you say, there were some close calls.
Very close.
So it worked out. But the key point is, it's not just religious freedom, but it's also this non-conformity, individualism, openness to capitalism in a way that the Puritans weren't. There's just a lot more freedom and just really good land. That's that. You don't say that enough. And there's a reason why the Narragansetts liked South County so much. There's a reason why the Indians loved Aquidneck Island in general. Is it's just a really good, really nice soil. And better than Massachusetts and northern Rhode Island and most of New England actually. So Rhode Island was. I mean, there's a reason why the biggest farms were in South County.
The planters in it. That's interesting.
So they're just really good land.
So
I also wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the slavery discussion, because you talk about that a little bit. So I think the important distinction is, and it's in that book, you talk about dark work, where she makes a nice distinction between the slave trade and the business of slavery.
Okay.
So the business of slavery is not just the slave trade, but everything, like selling horses to Barbados.
Okay.
In effect, that's the business of slavery, because Barbados, certainly by the 18th century, I'm not sure about the 17th, but certainly by the 18th century, the Caribbean, you have the Sugar Islands, they're all based on slavery, unfortunately. And so there's this huge demand for captures, African captives, mostly provided by Portugal and Britain, not us. Mm-hmm. Yes, we were the biggest colony, but we were still tiny compared to all these European ones. So
yeah.
We never dominated the North American slave trade. That's
okay.
It was always more of a British thing, but we were the biggest colony. To slave. You're right about that. And so the business of slavery dominated Newport and Rhode Island. So you just need to make sure with your wording, it's the business of slavery.
Yeah.
If you didn't have you didn't have slavery driving the Sugar Islands, the Sugar Islands would not have bought so much from us, and we wouldn't have been able to sell so much, we wouldn't have been able to ship so much. So to that extent, our economy was based on slavery, but not simply in the slave trade or owning some slaves here. It was much more, the whole economy is built on serving these rich Sugar Islands. And, when the revolution happened, the British were much more worried about losing the sugar colonies than they were about losing us, the American, the mainline American colonies, because they just got a lot more money from the sugar colonies, and to some extent Quebec, although that was dying off. So when they secured Canada, and when it was looking pretty good for the West Indies, and then when the French joined with us against the fight, like the British started losing interest. They did still fight in the southern colonies for a bit, but
yeah.
And I think by then it was, well, you know what I think about the revolution. So, I think your presentation was fine.
Yeah.
But I just have I have a different overall perspective, even though I think your narrative is spot on, and your storytelling is spot on.
Thank you.
It's just, a historian would put it a little differently. But I do want to make sure you get this point about the slave trade. That's an important distinction between the slave trade and the business of slavery.
Okay. All right. Got it.
And the larger point, and this really gets back to what happened, what I talked about earlier, which is certainly by the Revolutionary War, and probably even before, the problem is it's great soil, but it gets exhausted. So by the 1760s, the soil in Aquidneck is not so great anymore.
Okay.
And South County is good for a while, but even that eventually wears out. And so pretty much, but even before the Civil War, the slavery, slavery was dying out anyway. There was emancipation. But the South County farms were having trouble, before 1800, you really didn't have, these Narragansett planter grandees.
Yeah.
They were pretty much over by 1800.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I want to move into industrialization as well, and get into that topic with Samuel Slater and everything in Providence. So let's actually go right into that. Let's talk about Samuel Slater's success story, because I heard you on the Rhode Island History podcast saying how you were looking at that story specifically from an entrepreneur. Yeah. So can you speak to just how impactful, incredible what Samuel Slater did at Slater Mill, and some of the challenges he faced as an entrepreneur?
Okay. Now, first of all, you have to think about it in terms of there are two entrepreneurs here. There's Moses Brown and Samuel Slater.
Yep.
Moses Brown is providing the capital and the patience and the commercial connections, and that's very important.
Yep.
So that's something that Slater doesn't have to worry about at all, which is, huge. He's basically a penniless immigrant when he gets here.
Yeah.
But he's smart. Yep. So, and his big achievement, and you talk about this a little bit, but there have been all these attempts to basically imitate the Arkwright mills. Arkwright, he develops it in the 1770s, I think. So by the 1780s, a lot of places are trying to copy him. In Massachusetts, in New York, And Slater himself initially goes to New York City because he figured that's where the action is. And he just happens to get this letter from Moses Brown. And the good thing about Moses Brown is he's willing to give Slater a cut. Everybody else thinks, oh, Slater's just a mechanic. He's just a millwright. Yeah, he can help us build the machines, but he's not going to be all that important. And whereas Slater's got ambitions, he wants to be an entrepreneur. He wants a cut. And so Moses Brown says, come here. We've made some attempts just like everybody else, but we'll give you a cut. And again, this is part of the Rhode Island ethos. You believe in entrepreneurship, you believe in capitalism. You're not this sort of everybody's got a grandee, everybody needs deference. There's a kind of willingness to be open to partnership and all that.
Yep.
And so Moses Brown is that. And so Samuel Slater says, okay, I'll give you guys a try. And he comes in. And what's really important about Slater is, first of all, he just succeeds. It's just really hard to imitate any technology, and you have to adapt it to an American setup.
Yeah.
Different kinds of workers. The technology is probably pretty similar, but the factory system is different. He's got you have a lot of landless people who are kind of really down and out in England, and so you got a labor force that's much harder. And you talk about this a little bit. It's harder to get a labor force here, and so Slater has to kind of be entrepreneurial himself a bit in just devising the factory system. Moses Brown and Almy and Brown and all, they're really good for the capital and for the merchandising, the yarn once Slater produces it.
Yep.
But Slater's got to produce it, and so they've basically given him charge of that. They say, here's a site. Okay, it's a Pawtucket River. It's got a good water power. Now make it work. And Slater's got to be the total technician. He's got to make it work. And so even though he's English and he's used to an Arkwright system, he's able to transplant it and make it work here, whereas people who might have had the same background as him can't do that in these other states. There's this famous attempt by Alexander Hamilton. I don't know if you heard about it. Around the same time. And Moses Brown even writes to him, hey, Alexander Hamilton, we've got this cool thing going in Pawtucket. And Hamilton says, don't bother me with these details. I've got a much bigger deal. And it turns out it doesn't work. And because Brown and Slater really figure out how to do it right for the American approach. Hamilton's got all the capital in the world, but he doesn't have the entrepreneurial perspective to kind of really make it work. And so there's a lot of theft. I mean, they think they've got it made. I mean, there's a whole mess. Eventually they fix it, but Slater really deserves to be the founder of the Industrial Revolution in America. I mean, no question. He really figures out the key technical, translational kind of factory system problems. Yeah. Moses Brown is important because he's patient and he's willing to give him a cut. He's willing to support him. I mean, you talk about this a little bit. He really wants to help Slater work. And Brown, Moses Brown is interesting for lots of reasons we can go into later. But in terms of Slater, he's more than just a mechanic. He thinks big. And you talk about this briefly, but Slatersville, that's really him.
Yeah.
He's making that. Him and his brother, they really made that work, and so, and it was a huge success. So, now they were lucky in some ways too, but basically they had the right idea and they did it really well.
How were they lucky?
So there was all these trade restrictions. There were Napoleonic Wars, and so you used to get all this cheap British yarn.
Yep.
Because Arkwright was decades ahead. And that would come over here, and that was a real problem for Slater and Brown and all. But when the war started, the yarn stopped coming, and so you had the kind of open market, and so Slater and Brown made a ton of money. I mean, that's why Slatersville did so well too. Mm-hmm. But they just made a ton of money, and you got a lot of mills started up then in South County too. Yeah. And so it was, and eventually you got peace and. After 1813, a lot of mills here had to close because suddenly you had the cheap British yarn coming again.
Yeah.
But it was a really nice head start, and it was lucky that way. You got to remember, we tend to think entrepreneurship is all about what's up here, and that's that's important, but you also need capital and commercial connections, and you need a commercial economy in general.
You need a lot of grit too.
And grit.
Yeah.
And so the nice thing about Rhode Island, and this you can talk about this a little bit more. It's particularly in the 18th century. There's even a letter when it's called the Remonstrance. It's when I think Governor Stephen Hopkins. So when the British say, yeah, we're going to start enforcing the Sugar Act, and you're going to have to start paying some serious tariffs. Hopkins writes and says, we're just this little colony. We don't have a lot of land. Our farmland isn't that good. What we're really good at is shipping. And if we have to pay this tax, it's not just the West Indies. We're going to suffer a lot too. And so he basically lays it out. And that's why privateering was so good here. And so Rhode Islanders had that grit. They had they were looking for the main chance. They were looking for where you can make profits. There's a reason why we were the biggest slave trader among the colonies too. Yep. I mean, it's a lot of pretty familiar Rhode Island traits, for good and for bad, come out just from the sake of the geography. So Boston had such a nice harbor, even better than Newport in a lot of ways. And they were direct to Europe. I mean, they didn't have anything in the way. It was really, whereas we had the really good connection to the Caribbean, but they were set up in a way that we didn't have the scale. We didn't, so we had to kind of live by our wits. And so that was really good for a lot of things. Yeah. And it's what powered a lot of wealth in the 19th century in particular. And eventually it ran out for various reasons, but it was great for a long time. And I think it's still important.
But so one of the things that I also want to touch on is like there was so much wealth that was generated from trade. And yet you see such a focus by Moses Brown to build a manufacturing base in Rhode Island and like for America, which was interesting to me because like you're already making so much money on trade. Why do you care so much about like building this manufacturing base? So can you speak to why Moses was so obsessed with like making that happen and how it would benefit America?
Okay, well, there are two theories, and I think they both have some truth, but I think the second one's more interesting. So the first one is Moses Brown was a serious Quaker. And right after the Revolution, there was a bit of an economic depression, and there were a lot of Quakers who were out of work. And so he thought, well, what can I do to get a lot of people working? And the trade possibilities weren't that great in the 1780s either, because Britain says, okay, you don't want to be part of us, you're out of the empire. No more trading with the Sugar Islands. And so suddenly, we're stuck. So some of that is just the circumstances. Okay. The other thing you have to remember is the factories existed, long before what we call industrialization. Yep. So the Browns had a iron foundry. They had a candle factory with spermaceti, and so they were a lot of they had some experience with manufacturing. And the nice thing about manufacturing, particularly in the early years, it's labor intensive. Even once you had waterworks, you still need a lot of operatives. So it's now we think you don't need a lot of workers, but back then you needed a lot. And so and more than in shipping, and a lot of people don't want to just be sailors on ships anyway. Yeah, they want to stay here. So Moses Brown was interested in manufacturing even before Arkwright and Slater. Okay. And he heard about Arkwright's inventions and he thought, oh, that could work here. Yeah. Let's do that. And so that's when he started pushing it. But he was already, he and his brothers were already experienced in manufacturing. It wasn't like that was their first gig ever. Yeah. But again, what's really important in manufacturing is you got to sell the stuff, and you got to have the upfront capital, and you got to sell the stuff. And that he was already really good at. He had the connections, he had the capital, he had the mercantile trading house. In fact, there's basically once he got Samuel Slater and the Pawtucket Mill going, he kind of moved on. He wasn't that interested. He gave it to his nephew and son, Almian Brown. And they were in the family business of merchandising, trading and all, and they just saw Slater as kind of like this supplier.
Yeah.
He'll give us some cheap yarn. Okay, we can find markets for that. But they wrote to Slater and said, why do you need this extra money? Why do you need this upfront capital? And he had to explain all this stuff.
Yeah.
And said, I need to buy the cotton well in advance. And okay, all right, yeah. I mean, like they were not thinking industrialization. They were thinking, we're merchants.
Yeah.
And, okay, we got this nice supplier, and my uncle set him up. Okay, fine. But they why are we spending money on this? Like, it was very much, they saw it as secondary. Now Moses Brown, he was much bigger in manufacturing, obviously, for these reasons. But Almy and Brown, they were mainly merchandisers, not manufacturers. So once Moses Brown left the stage, then you had like a second round of conflict. Not just that meeting you talk about, but there was all this conflict between Almy and Brown and Slater. And finally Slater said, screw it, I'm going to go on my own. And that eventually led to Slatersville. And by then, it wasn't that hard to find, merchandise the yarn. And Slater had, because he was a partner in the business, he had some capital. Yeah. So he could really make it work. So he didn't need Almy and Brown at that point. But Almy and Brown were like, okay, whatever. We'll get it some other way. Like that was not, manufacturing was not core to them. Yeah. In a way it was for their own, so anyway. Yeah. That's the important thing.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot when creating this podcast is the way we should judge or think about historical figures when they do things that we look at today and we're like, that is obviously something that we find is horrid and like a practice we would never copy. So like when Slater is getting his cotton from slave plantations in the South, he's employing children, horrible working conditions. I'm thinking like, okay, how harshly should we judge these historical figures for doing things that we today condemn? So do you mind speaking to that? Like how hard should we?
Sure. Well, I would start with what your guy Jack Henneman said, which is, you want to avoid presentism.
Yes.
I liked what he said there.
Yep.
The second thing is, you got to remember, there's a reason we celebrate industrialization. It made us a lot richer and able to have nice things. Before industrialization, people lived in terrible poverty. And not just poverty of stuff, but just poverty of opportunity. And so there were a lot of, kids, most kids didn't go to school. Yeah. Most kids, they just went to work as soon as possible. And so for Samuel Slater to employ kids, that wasn't that big a deal. I mean, families willingly gave their kids to be worked there. Now they ended up saying, this isn't farm work. This is a little more regimented. This is noisy. Yeah. And you're keeping them there for long hours. Like, eventually they had problems with it. But the idea of child labor was not a problem for anybody back then. Yep. Kids worked on the farm. So what's the difference? Yep. They didn't really understand what factories really involved, I think. And factories got worse in some ways, you could argue. But so the first thing is, people were poor. They were just scratching out livings. As you say, the American colonies were relatively rich by world standards, particularly by the time of the war. But you have that nice thing where the Germans say, "Boy, you guys have it easy. What are you complaining about?" But even then, it was still what we would call terrible poverty. Yeah. And so this presentism isn't just, well, you got to judge people by the standards of the time. You have to just change your whole thinking about what you can expect of people. And it's the industrialization of people like Samuel Slater that enabled us to be rich enough to have these qualms, to say everybody should go to school. Why would you work in a factory at age 10? That's just terrible. Why do you, and then the other thing in terms of presentism about slavery wasn't a problem for anybody much until really the 18th century, really maybe a decade or two before the Revolution. And that's because everybody lived in a very stratified hierarchy. And so in the medieval times, it lessened a little bit, but in the medieval times you had the Great Chain of Being. You had the God up here, then you had the king, and then you had the lords, then maybe you had some minor gentry, and then you had everybody else. And there was some division between peasants and artisans, but basically you were a nobody.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the reason we call it a revolution is that it, for one thing, it got us free of England, of empire. We got to be independent, but we also got social openness in a way we never had before. You had aspiring nobility in the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin, he wanted to be a great lord with people to dominate over. He put a lot of effort into becoming a great lord. Only when that didn't work did he then say, okay, maybe think about another way. But he was pretty typical of the time for being for wanting a lot of hierarchy. And the difference between an indentured servant and a slave, which we think is so huge, it wasn't that big a deal back then. A slave was just somebody who was a little worse off than an indentured servant, but they were all nobodies, who cares? So slavery was just a more aggressive, permanent form of indentured servitude, which people didn't think of the way we think of now. And eventually people realized, it's worse. It's a lot worse than being a servant. It's So eventually people got it. I mean, there's still a lot of racism too, which was a big part of it. But it really wasn't until the Revolutionary War that people even thought of slavery as such a terrible thing. There's this great line from John Brown. I think you talk about it, or anyway, where he says, "Hey, when we bring these Africans here, we actually elevate them because they're going to have a terrible exit. Then we're much better off here, even though, even though they work for us. We're elevating. We're doing them a favor.
Yeah.
So, but he means it, and he's Moses Brown and the emancipators. They're they're unusual for that time. Eventually, it gets to be a majority opinion. But even the beginning of the Civil War, a lot of people are saying, we got no problem with slavery. We just don't want it in the West because it's going to create our social betters, and we want an open society.
Yeah,
they don't care about blacks. A lot of the whites, most of the whites who are fighting for who join the Republican Party or fight for the Union Army, they don't care about blacks at all. They're probably as racist as anybody, but they just don't want slavery because it screws up the social hierarchy. They've got a different kind of perspective. Now, eventually, people come around, but it takes a long time. And there's a nice evolution, which you should talk about some more, in the 19th century with the Hazard family in South County. Yeah. And I thought you missed some important things in the story you told about them.
Expand on that. What things?
So first of all, I think you say this, in the 17th century, the Hazards are these big landowners in South County. And then in the 18th century, in the early 18th century, they're the big landowners. After the war, they take a lot of that capital and they create mills, like Peacedale and all that. And you've got Roland Hazard and his brother, I'm blanking on their names. Anyway.
I think Isaac is the brother.
So they, in fact, this book, I just saw
down
this
a
book.
Little. Plantation Goods. Yeah.
So, this is a really
great book. I love that book. Yeah.
So, I know the guy, he's here. He's local.
Yeah.
Maybe you can even have him come. But
I hope to one day.
He does point out, so the focus of the book is on plantation goods and all, but he does have this nice section where he says, the Hazard family is interesting because by the 1850s, they've kind of become abolitionists. And why is that? And you think, well, wait a minute, they're totally tied to slavery. They have no problem with slavery. They go down there, they buy and sell from these, slave-driven plantations. They talk to slave owners all the time. What's the problem? And they become abolitionists. Why? And he doesn't really explain here, but other places do. He talks about it a little bit. No, I should say that. But there are two reasons. One is the market changes, and the technology improves, and they start selling to a lot of northern buyers in Philadelphia and other places. And you have people going west, they're buying too. And so instead of being stuck selling Negro cloth,
Yeah.
now by the 1850s, he can sell in all these other markets. So he's not tied to Southern demand the way he was, or the way they were before. And also they just really believe in a lot of what the Republican Party stands for, and they don't like the Democrats. And I shouldn't say they ever become abolitionists, but they definitely join the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And there's this great letter from a slave master who says, "Hey, you joined the Republican Party. You're one of these black Republicans. You know, like, how dare you do that? I thought we had like an arrangement."
Yeah.
And Hazard writes, I forget which one, writes back and says, "Yeah, okay, that's I believe in the Republican Party, and anyway, he doesn't say this, but I don't need you anymore so much." And so there's that evolution. And again, so to say that Rhode Island is, more racist or more slavery oriented than other colonies, or certainly other northern colonies, I think is missing something. Because what's important is that Rhode Islanders are more entrepreneurial, and they're going after the main chance, and they're kind of amoral, you might say.
I see.
But as soon as the markets change and he gets a better deal, Roland, Hazard, or Isaac, they're going to go to elsewhere. They don't, they're not committed to the South in a way that, you might think. They're certainly not committed to slavery. I mean, they keep buying cotton from the South, but they're just entrepreneurs. They want to go where the profit is, and once that's in the North, then they don't have to kowtow to these Southern grandees anymore, and they can say what they want.
Yeah, but I mean, there is something to say for him holding back those statements until it doesn't hurt his business.
Yeah.
Where
That's true.
he's no longer attached to the South, and he says, "All right, now I'll speak for the Republican Party finally." So yeah,
you're right. Before that, he's like any businessman, whatever my customer wants. That's
Wait, well, it's also interesting, like when we say that, like, how dare he not stand up for the Republican ideals of those times, even though it would have hurt his business. It's a lot easier said than done, because like there are things that business owners or employees, consumers do every day that go against like ideals that we hold. Like we're filming this on an iPhone.
Yeah.
An iPhone, from my understanding, is made from pretty much like slave labor, like part of the piece of it.
It was not slave labor, but yeah.
Well, it's some very horrendous form of labor.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is like,
Yeah.
it's so easy for us to judge historical figures when we ourselves are not perfect.
And just to make sure, plantation goods is not really about the hazards. It talks a lot about them.
Yeah.
But they're just one example of a number of northern industrialists who sell to the South. So I don't want to single it out either way. It's just the hazards are interesting because you can really chart Rhode Island's development a lot with them.
Yep.
So that's why I thought you were just missing something in your treatment.
Yep. Okay, so before we move on to like the later years of the industrialization, in say like the 1820s, 1830s, when things really start to ramp up, is there anything else you want to add about like early industrialists during the time period, or other parts of the story that you think it's important to mention during the 1790s and like first few years of the 1800s? That's important for people to understand when thinking about industrialization in Rhode Island.
Okay. I mean, the biggest thing to remember, and let me just really emphasize this, is that industrialization is hard.
Yeah.
Early on, a lot of capitalists are cautious.
Yep.
And so what's great about Rhode Island, I think, is you had capitalists who were risk takers. And, you had the Brown family, you had other people. And so contrast that with, in Boston, you have the Boston Associates.
Yep.
And they're really good at collecting a lot of money. They're merchants too. They're very wealthy. They can concentrate capital. But their first attempt at a spinning mill fails terribly. And then once everything works out for the Rhode Islanders, they say, okay, maybe there's something here. And they build something in Waltham, which works pretty well. They do bring some technology. You got to give them credit for this. There's this kind of power loom that they put. I mean, there was one here too, but they really pushed that well. and then you get Lawrence and Lowell.
Yep.
But once they find something they think is pretty safe, then they throw a lot of capital in it.
Yeah,
Whereas Rhode Islander is more sort of the pathfinder, pathbreaker. They're the early entrepreneurs. They're the capitalists, and they develop stuff. And I mean, there's a reason George Corliss came here and not Massachusetts.
Where did Corliss come from?
He came from upstate New York.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he could have gone to Albany. I mean, there were a number of places that had some manufacturing by the 1840s, I think. But he came all the way to Providence. So why did he? Well, we don't really know exactly, but Providence had two powerful things that are worth emphasizing. One is you had a good manufacturing base already, and he at the time he wasn't trying to he didn't have a steam engine yet. He had he had another kind of technology which turned out not to work well, but he just had a great mind. So he wanted to go to a place with a good manufacturing base. He was also really ambitious. And the nice thing about Providence is you had a rising middle class, which not every city had. And Boston was kind of questionable because you had a lot of elitism in Boston. But Providence was a more open place, and he thought he had a better chance at opportunity, I think. And so he came here, and he does this first venture and it doesn't really work. And then he joins a company as kind of a draftsman.
Okay.
And then he has this idea for a better, steam engine, and it's brilliant. And he attracts enough capital to demonstrate it. And then he takes a big chance and builds it. And then he takes this even bigger chance in the World's Exposition, I think
1876.
I forget, 1876. Where he says, "You guys need a power source for the expedition?
Yeah.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, how many engines you want to build? Oh, one's enough." And he builds this giant, which is crazy, He wasn't gonna. Nobody was gonna buy a steam engine that big.
Yeah.
The power, but he wanted a show.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make an exhibit, in effect, and it worked out great. And his wasn't the first steam engine, but I don't know if you point this out, but. His steam engine was much better for mills than the existing steam engine. So once you had this improved steam engine, then
changes the game.
I mean, that's why Fall River took off. I mean, all these mills said, we don't really need water power anymore. We just need a good coal source. And so that's when you started having cities and Fall River and all that. Then shipping and you had to have some water source, but you didn't need to be out in the middle of nowhere with a stream anymore. So he really, you might even call it, some people call it the second phase of industrialization. I don't know about that, but it was really important. And he was the first, and he just dreamed it up himself. And he, not only that, but he had enough money left over from savings to demonstrate it. And then he attracted enough local money for a couple of demonstration projects, and then he was off and running. He got sales, and by 1876 he had plenty of money. I mean, I don't know if you can see his house is still standing. They haven't torn it down yet, but it was bought by somebody else. But I mean, he lived in a nice house up on the east side, and he really made it. The problem is he didn't, he wasn't so blessed with descendants, but he really was just strikingly important for industrialization, I think, for the world. I mean, it was his invention was used worldwide.
Well, you said something really interesting there that I've never known, is that by him building a steam engine that was so effective for mills and factories, you didn't have to need to be by a river or stream. You could put the factory wherever you wanted it. And you would obviously want a factory near like a good shipping center or something. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
That's why the cities could get bigger?
Okay, so you had steam engines before, but they didn't work very well. They didn't work very well with machines, with mills, because with mills, you want steady, smooth power. And if you have a certain jump, that could really screw up your machines.
Okay.
Now, steam engines were originally developed for coal mines to help bring coal out, and the machinery wasn't that fine, so the basic steam engine, and you had plenty of coal, so it worked great for there. And so, but yeah, he figured out a way to really make it smooth. So if you really wanted a textile mill with a steam engine, you could do it before Corliss, but the trade-offs weren't
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
So that's why when in Slatersville, Slater wasn't going to use a steam engine, he was going to use a water source. But by 1850s, if you were going to build a textile mill, you probably were going to do it with steam power because now it was just going to be, you could use it year round. You didn't have to worry about ice. You know, it just made a lot of things so you didn't have to worry about damming and creating a channel. You had to do some other things, but it was just much more manageable.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is like what actually ignited the American Industrial Revolution. And obviously there's Slater Mill in 1793, but then there's a whole 15-year period where I don't want to say nothing happens, but it's a slow ramp up. And then it seems like out of nowhere, it just explodes and like there's mills being built everywhere. So can you speak to like some of the factors that ignited the American Industrial Revolution?
Okay, well, so we need to back up a little bit.
Okay.
So the demonstration is 1790. You know, that's when Slater shows Brown. I mean, you talked about this a little bit.
Yep.
You know, and then he builds what we know as the Slater Mill.
Yeah.
You know, in 1793, and then there's, you know, it's very risky in what he's done. I mean, and he's very secretive. He doesn't like. You know, so it just takes a while. What he did is kind of extraordinary. And so there is a slow ramp up.
Yeah.
One of the reasons power loom takes off so fast is that there are multiple kinds. There's the Gilmore loom, there are a couple different looms. And so even though the Boston Associates do so well with the power loom, there's some other alternatives too. So
yeah,
but it is a slow ramp up. And then when I talked about the sort of the Napoleonic Wars,
yeah,
once you start having these, and you have an embargo, and you know, once you start having these restrictions, you don't get all these nice, cheap European goods coming. Suddenly, American entrepreneurs are kind of stuck.
Yep.
And there's this. I think sometimes we forget that we were a colony.
Yeah.
And we had really a colonial attitude, and the British and the Europeans looked on us as colonies.
Yep.
And back then, a colony meant you're bringing wealth to the mother country. And so the English, they look over at Spain making all this money from its American colonies, and they think, hey, why can't we do the same? Oh yeah, I guess New England doesn't have any specie. Well, for a while, they just wanted to shut down New England and send all the settlers down to the Caribbean because they thought the Caribbean had more potential. And in fact, that was, you know, talk about the Dominion of New England briefly.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. But anyway, obviously that didn't happen. But so industrialization is very much a reaction to, or let's see, there's a big debate right after the revolution when we're forming the new, you know, country, the federal system, and there's a debate between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson says, why do we need a big old fancy country anyway? Why can't we all just be farmers and you know, be subsistence? And Hamilton says, no, we want to be a great commercial republic, and we don't want to be a colony anymore. We don't want to be in anybody's empire. We want to, you know, stand on our own 2 feet and be our own country. And fortunately, Hamilton more or less wins out, even though Jefferson kind of eventually, you know, he has to work from the Hamiltonian foundation. And so so even with these trade restrictions, which Jefferson eventually goes along with, he even makes it worse, and arguably. So once you have these trade restrictions, then suddenly, okay, where are we going to get our goods? Well, we got to make them ourselves.
Yeah,
and so there's your big burst of.
Yep.
So really, 1807, 1808, that's when industrialization really takes off. And then once you have peace, and you know the end of the War of 1812 too, and you know it's all kind of tied together. It's this whole long period of disruption. By 1816, 1817, you have a depression. You have a panic even, because suddenly
the British goods are coming back.
All these European goods, or particularly British, are coming.
Yep.
And so a lot of mills go out of business, and what's going to happen? And fortunately, We start setting up some trade barriers. I think that probably helps.
Yeah.
But mostly the entrepreneurs just rise to the occasion, and enough of them don't go out of business, and you have innovations like the power loom, which take off here, and the Boston capitalists are, they're risk takers enough
Yep.
to want to put a lot of money into what, you could argue, if you're total Jeffersonian minded, you could say, why does Massachusetts or the country need all these big fancy industrial centers? We should all be farmers still. And they say, no, we want to make money and we think there's an opportunity, we're willing to take some risk. So they take some risks.
Yeah.
And I don't want to paint too dark a picture of them, but and the nice thing is they just have a lot of money to throw around. And so you have a lot of entrepreneurship here too.
Yep.
But it becomes like all over the country, particularly
Yeah.
in the north. And so that's when you get industrialization, really.
Yeah.
You get a burst around 1808, and then it builds up enough momentum and capital so that even after 1816 or 17, when the British goods start coming in, you've got enough people who've tasted that success and want to just continue it.
Yeah.
That it just takes off.
So there's the Jefferson embargoes, and then there's the War of 1812 that pushes industrialization. But what about tariffs? How big of a picture do tariffs play in enabling Rhode Island industrialists to be successful?
So that's controversial.
Yes.
So there's some historians who say tariffs were great.
Okay.
Infant industries, you got them going. They were really essential, and eventually we didn't need them, and we were just lucky that Britain was willing to accept our tariffs, and they had other markets, and they didn't fight us too much, and we were able to pull off the tariffs. And there are other people who say no, tariffs are corrupting and they distort things, and we're lucky we overcame them. And I tend a little bit to that side. I co-authored a book about entrepreneurship where I talk about that a little bit. So tariffs are really dangerous. That's not something I think we talk about now, but particularly with a narcissistic leader who wants to amass power, they can be really dangerous. So tariffs are not necessarily a terrible thing, particularly for if you have a certain kind of development in mind, but they're just dangerous.
Okay.
And so what was great about our industrialization was, even though we had tariffs, there was still Britain, which was fairly free trading, at least with us, and they were willing to go along. They didn't fight us anymore, and they were willing to tolerate our tariffs, and we pulled it off. And we didn't set really high tariffs, but because if we did, then the South would threaten to secede and cause problems. So we kept them manageable, but high enough so that industrialization could take off here. Mm-hmm. And Rhode Islanders really benefited a lot from the tariffs. Now they were also really dangerous, and they caused some problems. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, but it's there are these indirect effects of tariffs which are really worrisome.
Yeah.
So I don't think tariffs are just wonderful.
Yeah.
Even for infant industries. So anyway, it's controversial. I think you can make an argument that tariffs are really good for Rhode Island industrialization. No question. I'm just not there yet.
So there's outside factors like the Jefferson embargo, the war, tariffs, but then there's also the entrepreneurial spirit and things that allow us to succeed on our own. Like, what percent of it does our success come from Rhode Islanders' own grit and mentality versus just external factors allowing us to be successful? If you can put it.
I don't know how you answer a question like that. I mean, both mattered, but I think the grit and entrepreneurship really matter in the first place. I mean, look at Corliss, George Corliss. Why did he come to Providence in the 1840s? He could have gone to a lot of different cities. Yeah. And I think he went here because we had a good manufacturing base, and we had the stuff, but we weren't the only ones to have the stuff. Yeah. He could have gone but we also had, social openness, unlike Boston. We had a rising middle class. We had opportunity, and nobody like Corliss, son of a shopkeeper, I think, he could really make it in Providence in a way he probably couldn't have in Boston or even Hartford or New York City. So he was ambitious, and you needed somebody who was ambitious and just brilliantly, technically, innovative.
Yeah.
And so if there hadn't been tariffs, I like to think we would have figured out something else.
Yeah.
Figured another way to do it. It might have taken
Yeah.
longer. Wouldn't have been as wealthy probably, but like it would have still worked out.
Yeah.
Other people would say no, tariffs were huge. So I don't know how you answer that, but
It does seem like Rhode Islanders from the late 17th century to like the end of the 19th century were going to make money one way or another.
Yeah.
They were just successful.
Yeah.
I mean, like with the slave trade and the business of slavery,
Yeah.
as you were saying, and then moving into like other international maritime endeavors and
Yeah.
industrializations, like they were going to make money. It was
Yeah.
just what they were going to make money off of was really the question.
I think so. I mean, in a way, it was a good thing that our farmland it was good for a while, and then it got depleted.
Yeah.
And that was good because it forced people to think about other possibilities. I mean, that book, The Economic Transformation of Rhode Island, that
Yeah.
talks about it. At first, all these merchants in Providence, and they wanted to treat Coventry and Foster and all those places like, you're just going to send us supplies.
Yeah.
We're basically going to colonize you.
Yeah.
And people in Coventry and Foster, no, we're our own people. We're going to decide this on our own. And it wasn't, you didn't start having good roads and development until people in northern Rhode Island started saying, okay, let's do this. It wasn't
Yeah.
the merchants. They were going to, whatever the merchants wanted, they were going to be opposed.
Yeah.
But by 1802 or something, once you started having local entrepreneurs who said, yeah, we should have a better road to Providence. We should start sending our kids to schools. These are good ideas.
Yeah.
Only then did they go.
Then does it happen? Yeah. So, all right. So you brought up roads leading to Providence. And one of the things I talk about in season 3 is how kind of like this saying about Rome, all roads lead to Rome. At that point in the mid 19th century, it was like all roads lead to Providence. And Providence was just the epicenter of everything that was Rhode Island's economy. So can you speak to just how powerful Providence was as a city in the like mid 19th century?
Well, there are a bunch of reasons for it, but it had an okay harbor, not as good as Newport's, but it had a much bigger hinterland, than obviously Aquidneck Island. And once you had the good roads, you could really make it work, and you started having a lot of industry. This is a little later, but you know about the 5 industrial wonders of the world?
Oh yeah, for
So
sure.
that's
My
more,
dad used to work at Brown and Sharp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's more late 19th century, but even you had a thriving industrial base in Providence by the 1850s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Corliss came here, and it was Newport had really suffered terribly.
Yeah.
And it was limited in a lot of ways, and Providence was the up and coming. I mean, the most interesting thing is Salem. Providence could have been like Salem.
Okay.
Perfectly nice town.
Yeah.
Had some manufacturing, has a decent harbor, but clearly subservient to Boston. In Providence, even in the 18th century, they could have just been subservient to Newport, because Newport was like the grand harbor.
Yeah.
It was clearly where you wanted to be. And the Browns and other people said, no, we're Providence. We're going to be strong and wealthy in our own right. We're going to send ships directly to wherever. We're not always just going to dump stuff off in Newport and let them trade for us. We're going to take risks. And so you had enough Providence boosters, you might say, to make it work.
So, all right, so let's go into Providence then, like by the Civil War, even post-Civil War, and like talk about the 5 industrial wonders.
Okay.
What were those companies, and just how big were those companies?
Okay, let me get this right. So there was a Corliss Steam Engine Company, Brown and Sharp,
Yep.
American Screw, Nicholson File,
Yep.
and what was the 5th one?
Did you say Gorham?
Gorham, Gorham,
Yeah.
that's the 5th one.
Okay.
Yeah, so those were global leaders
Yeah.
in what they did. Like, if you wanted the best, you went from there. They had some, like Gorham was in a battle with Tiffany to some extent, but it's still they were like leading the world.
Yep.
And they were all in the city limits of Providence. I mean, it's kind of remarkable.
It is. It's crazy.
I mean, there's a reason we have such a nice state house. We had a lot of money in 1900, and we could spend it on a really nice state house. In fact, some people say in 1900, Rhode Island was the richest place on earth.
Yeah.
So it depends how you define that, but it was definitely one of the richest. And it was because we had such great manufacturing, and we had good commerce, we had good harbors for bringing coal and everything in. So we had a lot of good factors, and we had that entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And I mean, and then there's a question of, well, how come we aren't so rich now? Why? What happened in the 20th century? So that's a whole other story. But by 1900, with those 5 companies and offshoots, I mean, Cranston Print Works and other, companies elsewhere. I mean, they were just really strong, well capitalized, not as big as some companies were, but still like if you take the Sprague textile empire, you talk about that a little bit. So the Spragues didn't just build one big mill. They built lots of small to medium sized mills all around Spragueville and various other places. Mm-hmm. So and that's because so the collection. I mean, I think BB Knight. Anyway, at some point it was the biggest collection of textile mills.
Yep.
Total spindles, or however you mentioned it, but it wasn't the biggest single factory of anything.
Yep.
Whereas the 5 industrial wonders of the world, they had good-sized factories, and they were specialized, unlike textiles, and they could charge a nice premium. And so the fact that they had a good-sized factory, they had enough capital, and they really made it work. Whereas textiles, once you build a certain size factory, it wasn't all that efficient to build anymore. And anyway, people didn't trust you to invest their money so much here. So unlike Massachusetts.
So in your book, then, I think you said you talk about Corliss. Do you talk about any of the other business leaders of the?
So Corliss, Gorham, Brown and Sharp. Yeah, I have chapters on each of those.
Nice, very cool. Have you read the book about Brown and Sharp, the company? There's
Carbones. Yeah,
it's somewhere up there.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah. That's another good one.
Yeah, it's a nice book.
Joseph Brown was really a genius. He was. It was.
Well, they both were. Lucian Sharp.
In their own way.
Yeah.
He was more of a businessman.
They
where
were
Joseph
a really
Brown
good
was
connection.
Yeah.
And that's what you often need. I mean, that's Brown and Slater, you could argue.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's So I mean, that's the interesting thing about Gorham. Gorham did it. I'm trying to remember the Gorham history, but anyway, you really need. I mean, and they were. I mean, the thing about these industrial wonders, they were fine. They were strong for a long time. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they declined, it's hard to fault them. The problem is, why didn't we do other stuff after that?
Yeah,
we had such a nice head start. Instead, all the money went down south and other places, and people lived high on the hog. And so the question is, we made this nice transition from merchant, commercial stuff, shipping and all that, into manufacturing. That worked really well.
Yeah.
Why didn't we make the next transition to services and high tech? Boston actually did pretty well with high tech.
Yeah.
And although they went through a tough time too for a while, but they made that transition partly because they saw what was working on the West Coast, and they got their capital together, and they took some risks. So we got to give them a lot of credit. Yeah. Why didn't a version of that happen here?
Answer that question.
So I wish I could.
Okay.
I try to answer it in the book. I say, okay, so why is it, Hasbro? I've got a chapter on Hasbro. Why did they succeed? And they're the kind of company you wanted. Why weren't there more Hasbros? I guess.
Yeah.
And so like Textron. Why isn't Textron a big company? I mean, they've gone into helicopters. They could have been, but they're not that big. They're not that profitable. I mean, they're just the kind of some of it is conglomerates are just not a good form for Rhode Island. They don't really play to our strengths here. And the fact that Textron, when it became a conglomerate, was a problem. And industry in general kind of went the conglomerate route in a lot of ways. So some of it is the American economy just moved out of a place where that was going to be good for Rhode Island. I think arguably it's changing, and it's once again going to be a good place for us. But there was, the late 19th century and late the 20th century was just problematic for Rhode Islanders for a lot of ways. So, I mean, that's what's so interesting about a company like Vibco. I'm sure Carl Wadenstein's company. So that's a small high-tech company in Richmond, I think it is, or Hopkinton. Anyway,
Really?
yeah, it's way out, but they've really done well. And
Really?
they were in New Jersey. His father built the company, and then got these nice help from. He wanted to expand, and the New Jerseyans weren't that cooperative. And the Rhode Islanders said, "Come here," and they didn't get a lot of subsidies, but they cut a lot of red tape, and so his father moved the company to Hopkinton and got it going. And it's not a big company; it's very specialized, but it is a kind of high tech.
What do they do?
So they make vibrators. Do you know? So not the kind of vibrators you think, like in a.
Okay.
If you're like a, there's certain kinds of like. How do you? Like, let's say, this is probably not their main customer, but like if you make seeds, okay? And you want seeds to get packaged right,
Okay.
you need to sort of shake up the bit in order to get all the seeds out into the thing.
Okay.
So you need a vibrator, so you get a vibrator from them. So they're
Interesting.
basically industrial vibrators. They're way better. I bet Carl would smack at me if I said this, but like they make vibrators for industrial purposes, particularly for packaging and processing when you need kind of shaking up. And so instead of having somebody out there doing the shaking, you have an automatic vibrator do it. So it's
and they're in Hopkinton.
They're in Hopkinton or
somewhere
around there. And it's a very successful company, and they were so grateful. So the company's done well, and so they were so grateful that when Carl Wadenstein was asked to join the council, Economic Development Council, he said, "Sure, be happy to. You guys are really nice to us. I want to help out future entrepreneurs." So he comes, and he's just really smart about it too. And so when 38 Studios comes up, he says, "I don't think this is good for us," and he votes against it. He's the only one to vote against it. He's the only one still on the council because of that, I think. And I think he's just really, he gets what's really powerful about Rhode Island in a way that I think, like, the governors and other people don't always.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of being a Me Too state. Let's leverage what we have, what we're good at, what we've been historically good at.
Yeah.
So that's.
So you sound hopeful about Rhode Island's economic future, and maybe I shouldn't say that as like we have like a horrible economy because like the state's beautiful and everything, but like you do see stats that it says it's like the worst state to start a business in, which I think you mentioned is kind of misleading. All right, let me ask you like a two-part question then. How solid is Rhode Island's economy right now? Maybe we can start there. And then how hopeful are you about its future as well?
Okay. So we have a lot going for us.
Okay.
And that's partly because we're just a fairly well-educated, fairly well commercially advanced state with a good quality of life, and we're close to major centers, we're major metropolitan areas too, excuse me. So we have a lot going for us. And what we have against us is some of the problems of, we've got a sort of a big government that tries to, I don't want to sound too Republican here, but we've got a government that doesn't treat business as well as it could.
Okay.
I mean, this thing about we're the worst place to start a business, it's misleading because it's just a mix of factors, and whatever your mix is, it's going to vary. So I don't think we're the worst place. I'd much rather start a business here than in Mississippi, say, or even Kansas. So you have to watch that.
Okay.
But why are we poorer than Massachusetts and Connecticut? Okay.
Yeah.
That's I think a really good question. And so part of the question is Massachusetts and Connecticut had agglomerations of capital and cooperation that we never wanted, never had, were never good at. And a lot of California and a lot of the entrepreneurship has happened in other parts of the country. New England has more competition in a way for entrepreneurship, you might say, Rhode Island has. So that's part of it. I mean, we were really weird in the 18th century, and the 19th century, and the rest of the world has caught up with us a bit. But the reason I'm hopeful is that the future economy is not going to be so cooperative, collaborative, consolidating. The future economy is going to be based on, okay, you've got an infrastructure provided by other people, and these startups. You heard about global startups? You know that term?
No.
So the idea is, before, when you wanted to be a startup company, certainly in the 20th century, you could do it, but you had to have a partner. You had a big company as a partner. You needed, to help supply the capital and the commercial connections.
Okay.
Now, a lot of the commercial connections you can get on the web. A lot of the capital, it's much easier to get capital too. And so you can be a global, or you can be a really strong startup and you can sell globally without being tied to a big company.
Okay.
AI is a little, we got to see how AI plays out. But, assuming it plays out kind of the way I think it will, Rhode Island's got a real chance because it's a great place for entrepreneurship in terms of everybody's nearby.
Yeah.
We're a fairly densely populated state with a lot of skills, a lot of education. What we don't have locally, we can get from Boston and New York without a lot of trouble. And so if you want to start something, you can do it here. And, like Regent, they have Narragansett Bay. Okay, that's a big part of it. But they started up somewhere else. There's a reason they came here.
Okay.
And it's not just Narragansett Bay. So I think I think we have some potential. The problem is, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble with some of my friends, but because we've been a wealthy state for so long, we have fairly generous social services. We have a larger government than we have more administration than we probably should have. And we just have more complacency, and we have we don't have the mob anymore, but we have just people who are used to, we're a wealthy state, I want my share.
Yeah.
Okay? We're not hungry, and we're not as hungry as we were in earlier years. Certainly, we're very hungry in the 17th, 18th century. The 19th century kind of dulled us a little bit. In the 20th century, even more. So that's why I think, that's why I think it's so important to tell these stories of the 17th and 18th century, to remind Rhode Islanders of, this is how you're different from, you're not Massachusetts, you're not a subsidiary of Massachusetts, you're your own thing, and we got to leverage that. And Massachusetts is great for a lot of things. They're always going to be powerful. They may always be richer than us.
Yep.
But we've got a lot. We've got our own thing, and we can be proud of it, and we just need to push that.
Keep Rhode Island weird should be the...
Okay.
You said something there. You said, if AI plays out the way I think it will, how do you think AI will play out?
Okay, well, I'm a historian, not a business analyst, future. So I don't really know. Let's make sure that's clear. I don't really know that. So AI can play out in two ways. I'm just going to spout off, and you can take it for what you will. AI can play out in two ways. One is that it's infrastructure dominated, and that's how Microsoft, Meta, Apple, Google, they're going to dominate AI because they're putting a huge amount of money, OpenAI, they're putting a huge amount of money into these servers, into building AI as a service. Mm-hmm. But so that's one possibility, and they could dominate it. They could control the service. If you wanted really good AI, you might have to go through them.
Okay.
That's one approach. What I think is more likely, but again, I don't know, is you have something more like the internet, where once you had some big companies build the internet, and for a while it was a competitive advantage to be strong with it. But eventually, anybody could sell on e-commerce. Anybody could work on the internet. It wasn't a big deal. And so there's this great article that came out in the 90s about AI. It was called AI Doesn't Matter. I think it was even a book. It was an article and a book by a colleague of mine. Excuse me. And he said there was a time when IT, meaning basically the internet or infrastructure, was really important. Like when American Airlines got started with its Sabre reservation system, it was amazing. Mm-hmm. And people said, I want to work with, I either want to fly American or I want to work with an airline that pays a licensing fee to American. So American got really wealthy. It made a lot of money. And then eventually the the internet was mature enough, and these other companies figured out how to, the other airlines figured out how to do things, and American Airlines lost its advantage. So I think that's I think that's gonna happen with AI, but I could be wrong. It could play out much more of a, we own AI. If you want to do anything with AI, you have to go through us.
Yeah.
So that's what I don't know.
I guess we'll see.
And I really want to stick to the history as much as I can.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to the history then. Let's see. So one thing we didn't touch on that I wanted to in the 19th century period is the Civil War. Obviously, huge conflict, changed everything. How did it change Rhode Island's economy?
Mostly in good ways.
Okay.
And so the Civil War did a couple things. First of all, it kept the Union together.
Yep.
Which is great because we try to sell the whole country.
Yep.
It also opened up the West to development in a way that was a little questionable before the war. And that was good for us too because we could sell out West. So it expanded the national market in really good ways.
Okay.
I think it got rid of the slavery, obviously, which was good for us indirectly because it meant, okay, Northern style capitalism and entrepreneurship, that's going to win out.
Yeah.
We're not going to have to kowtow to slaveholders anymore. We're not going to have enslaved people, mucking up our social system. I mean, I'm looking at this in the kind of amoral Rhode Island way. I mean, Civil War was great in a lot of ways, but but in terms of if you're a Rhode Island entrepreneur, this is how you think.
Okay.
So it opens up national market, opens up the social and economic system in a way. It confirms that middle-class capitalists are going to dominate the country, and they do dominate it politically. The Republican Party gets strong. It gets a little too strong, especially here, which is eventually a problem. But in the short term, it's great for Rhode Island. I mean, a lot of Rhode Islanders lose their lives. It's devastating in some ways for sure. But by the 1870s, it's really pretty strong here. And that's when you have the industrial wonders of the world.
Yeah.
And you have all this capital that's now eager to invest everywhere. And so it's really the golden age of Rhode Island's economy. And so the Civil War is really good for these reasons.
And what are some of the specific like stats or points you would use to prove why that period is Rhode Island's golden age?
Well, wealth. I mean, like I said, by 1900, we're arguably the richest state in the country.
Yep.
And all that, all those investments in Gorham and Corliss and American Street, they all pay off beautifully. They've got, this rising market of demand. We sell worldwide, and it's like we've gotten this head start, and the world hasn't caught up to us. And the nice thing about the war is it didn't destroy a lot of Rhode Island property. It killed, unfortunately, a lot of people, but it didn't really devastate the North the way it devastated the South.
Yeah.
And a lot of Rhode Island industry had moved away from the South by the time of the war. So losing the Southern slaveholders' demand was not problematic in the way it could have been.
Oh, interesting. So a lot of the Rhode Island industrialists had already moved away from selling like plantation goods. Oh, okay.
Yeah. He says that in the book, but he doesn't dwell on it because it's not really his focus. Yeah. But you might, if you ever do have him on, you might ask him about that change because there really is a shift. I think it's true of plantation. I don't know. I mean, over time, plantation goods just get to be easier. You just have a larger market. I mean, it's when the Hazards and a few other people start selling Negro cloth, they're really good at it and they're cheap and the slaveholders love it. And so, they've got a strong market. And then, but eventually, they start having some competition. So the fact that they moved to higher margins is not a big loss for the South so much. They start having their own mills even. So it's the timing worked out fine. If the Civil War had been 10 years earlier, it would have been a bigger problem.
It's interesting how much like external factors and luck is involved in all of it. Like when you think about the War of 1812, the tariffs, Providence having a bigger hinterland than Newport. So like that, like there's obviously the entrepreneurial part that is super important. But like then there's just so many external factors that like
I don't know. I mean, I've one of the big things I do for paid work is write company histories. And I've worked on a lot of company histories, and there are all kinds of terrible things happen to companies.
Yeah.
And some companies overcome them, and some companies
Interesting.
don't. And I tend to write on about the ones that overcome them, obviously.
Yeah.
But like I'm writing a company history right now where the son of the first son of the founder dies.
Okay.
And it's a huge calamity because he's assuming his son, but the father lives another 10 years, and fortunately he's got two other kids who kind of take over. One of them's really talented, but he didn't expect much from her, but she's really talented. So there's a kind of grit in entrepreneurship that I think can overcome bad luck. And so, arguably Rhode Island had a lot of good luck, but they also had a lot of grit in entrepreneurship to work with the bad things that happen. I mean, just look at the Revolutionary War. In some ways, as I say in my essay, we probably were going to win no matter what. But it took a lot of grit and resourcefulness, people like Nathaniel Greene, to pull it out. So, I think that's important. I think the underlying grit, you make your own luck at the long run.
That's true, because I just from starting this podcast, which is me researching, recording, and then posting stuff online, just that has made me have so much more respect for people who start an actual business and put capital on the line, and you don't have holidays. You're just it is on you to make money, which is really scary, and it's you have to have a lot of grit and just bravery to do it. It's incredible. So scary. Gosh.
Yeah, and it really helps to have a culture where your friends are doing that too.
Oh yeah.
And where there's capital, where it's part of the ethos. And there's some parts of the country where being an entrepreneurship is really frowned on, and other parts where it's fine. And in Europe, it's really frowned on. Take risks.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, we're more entrepreneurial. Take a look. There's an easy example, and I wrote a whole book about this, but there's an easy example of Uber.
Okay.
So Uber comes along, breaks every rule in the book. Every city and town, everywhere, all over the world, here and elsewhere, they have rules saying, okay, you want to operate a taxi, you have to do this. Uber says, hey, we've got this new approach to taxis. Would you let us do this? I know we're technically breaking the law, but would you let us do it anyway? And San Francisco and a lot of other places say, yeah, we really like this. Sure, we'll change our rules. Europe says, absolutely not. And so Uber's really big here. And eventually you get some Uber copycats. The technology is really good. Eventually they let in Uber, or they modify Uber, but Uber really succeeds beautifully here. Not so much in Europe, and not even so much in Asia.
Interesting.
And so it's because here people are just more open to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I think Rhode Island, in a lot of ways, epitomizes that kind of risk-taking, risking your capital. You've saved all this money, you mortgage your house. Why would you do that?
It's not only that, it's also the opportunity costs of where else you could be spending your time. You're not only losing the capital you were saved up and putting into it, but during that period when you're working and probably not making a lot of money at first, you could be making a salary and then putting that in a 401k, and that builds up. So there's that opportunity cost.
Oh yeah, they've done studies of entrepreneurs, and they've said, if you take apart the outliers like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, you take apart those people, and you look at most entrepreneurs, they make about as much money as they'd make if they just got a salary job in a company.
Oh, really?
And there's this great story of an entrepreneur. He's not a Rhode Islander, but I think he's from New Jersey or something. But he developed a new kind of e-commerce, and Walmart bought it and made him independently wealthy. And he agreed to work for Walmart for a couple of years. And as soon as that was done, he was out of there. And he was risking, again, a lot of money on this startup. He makes it's called, I forget what it's called, but it's basically mobile kitchens.
Okay.
And he's put a lot of money into it, and he's got a lot of, people he knows who said, oh, you made a lot of money from me last time. I'll trust you on this. And it's it's actually, he did it twice. He made he was 800diapers.com. I don't know if you remember that guy. I'm blanking on his name, but anyway, he made a lot of money on that. And then he made a lot of money on a better way to do Amazon or a different way to do Amazon. Amazon wanted to buy him. He sold out to Walmart instead. And then as soon as he was, as soon as his commitment to Walmart was up, he was out of there and he was sinking a huge amount of money. And you can imagine his wife was saying, okay, we have enough money now. Why don't you just take it easy? You don't even need to work for Walmart. You don't need to work for anybody. He says, no, I got to do this.
Yeah.
And so, there's that kind of drive.
Yeah.
Plus a larger culture. Yeah. And people, you got capital, you need something, you call up somebody's friend, or we're a small enough state, we've got a lot of stuff here. It's a nice concentration. And so that's how you make it work.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we're going to be all right.
Nice.
But I'm a historian.
Yeah. All right. So my wife is a great question asker, and she came up with this question that I should ask you. If you could go back to one moment in Rhode Island history, what would it be and why?
I would go back to the 19-teens and 20s.
Okay.
When all of these textile magnates, they made all this money, and they could see that Rhode Island was not going to be so strong in textiles, that it was all moving south, and why didn't they start the next big thing?
Okay.
Why did they? A bunch of them bought mills in the south, and some of them even moved south. And that turned out to not work out very well for a long time. That it was like the bloom was off, and they didn't see it. They didn't think, oh, let's go into the next thing. We've got all this money. Let's try something else now. Instead, they just stayed with textiles, and they had a nice, comfortable life. I mean, they're, the Hope Club. I'm sure they clip coupons. I mean, they invested money. I mean, Buffett. The reason it's called Berkshire Hathaway is I forget. Malcolm Chase owned this Berkshire Mills or something, and he was just looking around to invest, and this guy Warren Buffett came up and said, hey, I've got some ideas about how to invest. And Chase said, okay, I'll give you some money. And so Malcolm Chase and his family got very wealthy from Berkshire Hathaway, but it was mostly not here. So that money mostly went into entrepreneurship elsewhere. And so, I mean, that's like, earlier, that's more recent, but like I would go back to the teens and 20s and say, hey guys, or the Spragues even, they dissipated their money even before that. But like, come on, guys, like, what's the next big thing here? Look around. Don't let Boston do it. You don't have to be sitting around and have a depressed economy for a couple decades. We can start the next thing in good Rhode Island tradition. And they didn't. Why did they do it so well in the 19th and not so well in the 20th? That's what I'd want to know.
I'm not going to act like I know anything about the concept, but I know the term innovator's dilemma. Is it like...
It is a thing. It is a thing, but I don't think that applies here, because the innovator's dilemma, well, there's the kind of the easy generalist one, which is when you're an innovator, you succeed, you make a lot of money, you just become complacent.
Okay.
The actual innovator's dilemma is much more about within an industry. And so it doesn't apply here so well, because the idea was they would go into another industry. So like, John Brown, the Browns, they see opportunity in China, and John Brown sends a bunch of ships to China and does well. Okay, fine. But a lot of the money goes into manufacturing. So I can understand some money going in textiles, and okay, fine. But why didn't you put a big chunk of money into the next big thing?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. Why did we have to suffer through decades of kind of just flat? I mean, there was some good stuff in Woonsocket, but it was really not much happened. And World War II kind of propped us up a bit with the and then the Navy here, But then once that left, what do we have in the 70s? We're really depressed. I mean, people start leaving Rhode Island. I mean, it's, why wasn't there a strong foundation of the next industry to really ride on?
Yeah.
I mean, Boston did a better job of it than we did. Why didn't we make that transition better?
Interesting. All right, 2 more questions for you. The second to last one is, what is one or maybe like 2 or 3 of your favorite Rhode Island history books?
Books.
Yeah.
Okay, you probably have
If I have them, I'll be pumped.
You may have them. I think this book
Fantastic.
doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah.
This is a really nice thing. This book doesn't get enough. I really like this book.
Can you turn it the other way so
yeah.
people can? That is a phenomenal book. People should read that one.
So these are, and I think what else? This is an okay book. The Fat Mutton book. I don't see it here.
It's in the second to top row. It's green in the middle.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, that's a cool.
Yeah, this
cool
is a
book.
really nice book. It's only the 17th century, but it really describes Rhode Island nicely, and it gets away from this Roger Williams, the great hero kind of thing. It's nicely balanced. So
it's fun.
Anyway,
Yeah,
so.
I feel like he has a little bit of a attitude to him when writing the book.
It's a really good compliment. They were written at the same time. Like this book misses that perspective. So I mean, there's good stuff here, but you put these two together and you really understand colonial Rhode Island, I think, nicely. So
yeah. All right. Last question is, why should Rhode Islanders be proud of their history?
Okay. I offered that a little bit before, but let me just emphasize that there's a strong tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship and non-conformity here.
Yep.
That is distinct from our neighboring states, and that is pretty impressive. We were really world leaders, or even at least national leaders in a lot of ways, certainly regional leaders too. And so not to disparage our neighboring states, but there's a difference. There's a reason Rhode Island is a separate state.
Yep.
And I think and I wouldn't want us to just be, consolidated with the other states. There's a real distinction here, and I think it has some opportunities in the future that we can be proud of too.
Nicely said. All right. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I had a great time during the interview.
You're welcome. So did I.